Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley.
And I'm her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi and I want to welcome you to Open to Hope Conversations, the podcast.
We believe that the greatest gift you can give yourself after a loss is hope, using this moment to connect with others who have not only survived but thrived.
So let's get started. Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Rebecca Horsley Bara.
Great to have you on the show today with me.
It's great to be here, Mom.
So we have got a wonderful guest today, Brenda Daly, and we are going to be talking about substance-involved death. You know, there's so much going on about fentanyl and all those kinds of things in the world, and we are going to have someone on to give us some great perspectives on substance-involved deaths. So, Rebecca, let's talk about substance-involved deaths. Do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Mom. Today we have with us Brenda Daly. She's a grief educator, author, and clinical social worker with over 40 years of experience. Her work focuses on addressing complex issues such as addiction, codependence, and family systems while helping individuals and families navigate the profound challenges of grief. Following the tragic loss of her son, Kevin, Brenda became a certified specialist in grief therapy, including meaning reconstruction and art-assisted grief therapy. She's also a sought-after speaker, having presented at the Bereaved Parents of the USA National Conference and numerous local grief groups. Brenda is the author of I Got Up, a testament to resilience, healing, and finding light in the darkest moments. Welcome to our show, Brenda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Brenda. You know, one of the things that struck me about your story is the fact that I happen to have been a clinician working in the field of grief and loss when my son was killed suddenly. And it was a sudden death, as was yours. And I was a clinician and I'd worked in the field.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So
And
did I. Yes. And yeah, I felt like everything that I knew, everything I had learned was not applicable to my own grief. And so I had to seek out different ways to educate myself. And fortunately, through David Kessler, I found Robert Niemeyer at the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition, and that was life-changing for me. I have two
wow,
certifications from them, yes, and
they're
I'm
good
very,
friends of
very
ours.
so I'm proud, especially of the art-assisted grief therapy, because I always say I draw stick people, but I did find artwork, collaging, those kinds of interventions to be helpful for me in my grief journey, and to be able to put a lot of words into, you know, an image that I could look at. I'm like you, I'm a speaker. I can talk about feelings. I'm a therapist, but when it came to my own grief, I was challenged by getting that out and looking at it and being able to spend time with that without being distressed. So I love art-assisted grief therapy, collaging in particular. I do a lot of collaging workshops with people.
You know, the thing that struck me when it happened to me is how physical grief is and how you will go through it. I don't care what you know, who you know, what you know, the body does its thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Brenda, how soon after your son's death did you find these other ways of dealing with the grief?
Well, I pretty quickly found support groups, and then I ended up finding David Kessler. What was really amazing for me, it was probably the best education I had, was during COVID. David Kessler started this weekly, twice a week kind of support group, and he would have different people on talking about grief and loss. And he had just anyone you can imagine, celebrities to regular people to authors. And that was how I actually saw Bob Niemeyer and was like, I'm following this guy wherever he is. So yeah, so it was about 1.5 to 2 years after Kevin had died. But it was books too in the beginning. It
How
was
many years has it been since Kevin's been gone?
six.
Okay. So 6 years. You're still pretty early in the game.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So talk about his death in that it was a substance involved death.
11 years before Kevin died, he suffered a severe traumatic brain injury in a fall. And it just, I'm still learning about what the impact of that was. But, it changed. It changed him. It changed our lives. And he had, when he fell, he shattered his skull and he on one side, and he had a bleed in his brain, and they had to go in and suction it out and put a plate in his head. The plate doesn't cover the whole skull. It doesn't fit like a glove, and so there was a lot of pain associated with that. When it was cold, the metal plate would get cold, and so he lived with horrific chronic pain. And they started him on multiple different types of pain medications so he could function. And, it started with Norco. And eventually, it was the time of in our world where they were just handing out the oxy, and they were giving him a lot of oxy. It was a very, very good drug for him for a while because he could function. And then, after 7 years, you get addicted, if not 30 days, but most people get easily addicted to it. It's so powerful. But, and then they started to realize this was addictive, and they started to taper people down. And I even had someone, a nurse that was high up in his insurance, say that they tapered him too quickly. But so they would say, well, now we can't give you this, or we can't give you as much. And a lot of people, that was just a catastrophic decision for chronic pain sufferers. And eventually he started taking more, because it would be like, well, before I took this dose, before I took that dose, and then he would run out and he'd have to detox himself, and they wouldn't give him more till the next time. And he just laid in bed and suffered. And so he finally said, I'm quitting this. His wife was done with it. I don't want to do this anymore. It's ruining my life. And so for 6 months, he didn't use. And of course, the sad story is one night he went to the gym, met an acquaintance, bought one pill, and it had a very low dose of fentanyl in it. And it mixed with something else in the drug. His cause of death was a drug interaction with an enlarged heart. And I could see the pain in him. And, that week before he died, he was staying with me, and he was walking down the hall, and I went, oh, what's wrong? What's wrong? I got that panic in me, and I could see the dark circles, and it was from the pain. And even the coroner said to me, when she said fentanyl, that was like a couple months later, I was like, fentanyl? Kevin never took fentanyl. And she said, well, people with chronic pain do desperate things. And she said there wasn't enough in here to get high. And so one of the reasons I like to tell his story to people is I've met a lot of mothers who lost a child because their child had an accident or some kind of an injury, and they got on the fentanyl. They got on the Norco, and then it led to the next thing. And it's actually a fairly common story that fentanyl was related to oxycodone and chronic pain. And so for Kevin, I always say that he didn't get this honeymoon story of, oh, I quit doing the drugs, and I'm on this pink cloud and everything's great. And he suffered. When he didn't have the medication, he was in pain. He couldn't barely get out of bed. It was a very tough 6 months that he wasn't using. And even his doctor said to me, no, you're going to need pain medicine for the rest of your life. And don't do this.
I wanted to ask you, what did Bob Niemeyer say to you that was so profound?
Well, I think Bob Niemeyer is just a really accepting, non-judgmental person. And that comes across even on podcasts or videos. He just, so that was the first thing. But I think there was a lot of different authors and people that I got exposed to. It was just being in a group with other people. I remember the first time I was in a support group, and a woman said her son died of fentanyl. And it was like, oh gosh, you just gave me permission to say that fentanyl was a factor. I didn't want to tell people. There is a stigmatization to the loss of someone to a substance. I've been judged. He's been judged. My son has been judged unmercifully, even by family members, as just an addict. And that really bothers me, because I always say I didn't just bury an addict or someone who made a mistake one night. I buried the son I adored, that I loved, that I connected with, that we had these deep conversations. it's just such a one-dimensional thing to look at a person. And I think I've learned it makes people sort of feel safe if they can go, he died because he was an addict, or he did that. And then death, sudden death, tragic death, that can't happen to me, and I've got it together. But we live with this idea that we're in control somehow of the universe, and that was something I learned quickly, that from the beginning of the head injury, that I did not have control. The first thought I had when I found him was, I can't fix this. But so a lot of that, a lot of what I found about reducing my own stigma was hearing other mothers share about how their child passed away from a substance.
So peer support.
Yeah, peer support. I think that in healing, for me, and I think it's true for other people too, at first you have that gut punch and you're sort of doubled over on yourself, and it becomes about you getting support and help, and then you reach a point where you got to turn and do service, be there for the next person. And so it's this progression of healing that I see in myself and for other people. I know how much he struggled. I was with him through the pain. I was with him through the head injury, 11 years. I just, before the death, there was, like you said, the backstory. There's so much more to the story, and so much more to him as a human being.
Well, I think I always think, as my son's been gone for 41 years. So, and I've been in the grief and loss world, been involved with that for a number of years. And the thing that I realize now is it doesn't matter how they died. It matters how they lived.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of fentanyl deaths are dismissed or diminished, and I think the parents feel that really, really bad. And I wish there was, I feel like there's a unique grief for suicide loss, there's a unique grief for accidents, but I think this whole thing with the fentanyl, it leaves parents so reeling. Just, you hear it all the time, the stories of teenagers that didn't even have a chance to become an addict, really. They were experimenting, or a college student, and one night they're gone. One night. It's just so interesting, because I've done a lot of talks and I've been in these grief support groups, and there's just such a large number of deaths by fentanyl. You see it a lot.
Yeah.
It's tragic. Epidemic, they call it.
So what are the things that people have said to you that have helped?
I'm sorry you lost your son. Must be really hard. I didn't need anyone, like you said, to focus on the cause of death, just that he was gone. Just that I was missing him, and that he mattered to me. And I love it when someone that knows him will tell a story to me about him. And I remember seeing Kevin at this event or that. And, I don't think you have to focus on it. You don't have to totally avoid it, but you don't have, that's not the main thing I want to talk about with him being gone. I want to talk about what I miss, what I loved, who he was.
You were talking about service too.
Yeah, I think service is really crucial, or finding a way to keep his memory alive, finding a way to put the pain into purpose. I know a lot of people say that, but that's what I had to do. I've done a few scholarships in his name, one to the Heron Foundation. I did a couple of campaigns with Shoes That Fit, because he loved athletic shoes. Those things really help me, especially when I pass a really difficult anniversary, like the 5th anniversary. I did a campaign. I was able to get 550 athletic shoes to kids in a small town in Arizona that really are below the poverty line. And so those kinds of things I know would have touched him. I know he would have wanted to be a part of it. He was very generous, and it helps me. It's like I don't have to just sit here and look at his picture and feel like I want to die. I can do something with this.
I also know that you wrote a book, I Got Up.
Yes.
Talk to us about your book and when you wrote that.
Well, I was starting to do talks and, like I said, some of that service, and I kept feeling like my story was fragmented. And I think my grief was really fragmented, and I wanted to bring it together in a whole. So I actually, through the Portland Institute, I had done a collage, and that was the sort of the impetus to write the book. And in the collage, we only had 20 minutes to do this collage. And so collaging brings out a lot of unconscious things, and makes them conscious. And so first you pull pictures, and then you glue them to a poster board, and then we shared them. And so I had this collage, and on the right side, I had a picture. It happened to be Jill Biden, but it was a woman that was dressed in a professional suit. And I knew she had lost a child, and she was smiling. So I go, well, I put that there. And then on the left side, I had a picture of a woman that was black and white, the picture, and she was lying on these rocks, and the water was crashing up against her. And I was like, okay, that was me in the beginning. And I thought, what do I put in the middle here? What picture would go? And so I go through my stack of pictures, and I found another black and white woman, standing by a rocky shore. The waves weren't as bad. And I thought, this fits. So when I was explaining it, I said, I basically, this is when I was functioning. This is when I was distressed. And this is how I got from the acute phase to functioning again. And I looked down at the picture, and I said, how I did that was I got up and I started crying. I was like, I got up. It was a profound moment for me, because I started to understand my own resilience in grief, which is different than the resilience you hear about in the world or what they write about in the dictionary. It was like, oh wow, I got up. That's how I began to function again in the world. And it sounds like, oh, that's so simple, but really in reality, it was, I started connecting to other people, reading books, getting educated, those kinds of things, doing service that I just talked about. One of the things I started to do was practice gratitude through this class I took online during COVID. And that was really life-changing for me. I couldn't have in the first 2 years even talked about gratitude. Like, what do you mean gratitude? My son is dead. I'm not thankful for anything. But during COVID, I was bored, and I took this class from Lori Santos online. It's called The Science of Well-Being. And so we had to pick something of one of her rewirements to rewire our brains. And I picked gratitude. And so I had to write for 30 days, and you had to, expound on it. And one day I was like, I don't know what else to write on. What am I going to write on? And I looked outside, and I saw this beautiful fuchsia colored flower. And I walked outside, and I saw the trees were so green. And I realized it was a very, very profound moment, because I realized my world had been in black and white. It had been, or gray or dulled. Some people go, oh, it's really black and white. No, I mean, it was like it was dulled. I didn't see color anymore. And when I saw the color again, it was like, oh, wow, that's, it was like, it was a moment, and it was a moment spiritually. And it was the moment I realized Kevin lived with me in my heart, the love I have, and it never goes away. And in the beginning, I felt like that he died and it was severed. He was gone. And now I had this awareness, like just looking at the color in the world again, and experiencing gratitude. So that was something that was really helpful to me, was starting to practice. And I tell people, don't even begin to do that till you're about 2 years out. But all those things led me on my path.
Yeah, sometimes the simplest things are the most profound.
Yeah.
And just being awake and open to it.
Yes.
So if you had a piece of advice for me right now, and I've lost a kid to a substance-involved death, what would your advice? I'm early in.
I would say the most important thing is to connect to other parents with similar losses. That is the most important thing. There is grasp. I found through bereaved parents groups, grief, I think I was in a grief care or grief share program for a while. I found people there. There's so many. And so that helped me the most, was, it takes away that isolation of, and the shame. And you start to see that, well, she was a good mother, and she's a loving person, and, you can kind of mitigate some of the blame and damage that you're feeling. So that would be my main piece of advice, is find people with a similar loss.
And where can we find you?
Okay, I am available you can find me on the web page at brendadaly.com. You can find me on social media at Brenda Daly Author, and you can reach me at hello@brendadaly.com.
All right. Well, and you can get your book on Amazon.
My book is on Amazon, yes. And I'm just now coming out with a workbook. It should be out in January, which will also be on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for all your good work and all your help to people.
Thank you.
Brenda, it was so nice hearing your story and all the inspirational things you're doing in the world right now with your son Kevin as your guiding light.
Yes, he is my guiding light. Thank you.
And Rebecca and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.